I don't even want to see the face of someone who abandons her family. I want a divorce. It had been a long time since I had a conversation with my husband, but the first thing he said was the divorce. My mother-in-law started accusing me along with my husband. As I was overwhelmed by their aggressiveness, the living room door opened. Standing there was our daughter who had left home 6 months ago. I am Kayla, 45 years old. I live with my husband and mother-in-law. My husband and I got married in our early 20s. My husband and I are from the same hometown and we've known each other since when we were in school. After we both started working in our hometown, we began dating. After we got married and continued living in the hometown, my father-in-law suffered a stroke right after we had the wedding ceremony and he passed away a few days after being hospitalized despite the treatment. My husband didn't want to leave his mother alone, so we moved into her house right after we got married. A year later, our daughter Elsa was born. My mother-in-law diligently helped me as I was struggling with parenting because she was my first child. She said, "Taking care of a baby is a lot of work, so I'll handle it," and did household chores such as laundry and cooking proactively. She frequently gave me advice on parenting which I was not yet familiar with. I was completely relying on her, who was dependable. My husband was a quiet man by nature and busy with work, so he was often sleeping even when he was home, and we usually didn't have a lot of conversation. Yet, once our daughter started speaking, the house was always lively when she, my mother-in-law, and I were home. I understood that my husband was not uninterested in the family, but that he was working hard to support the family. Therefore, when my husband was at home, I tried my best and treated him in a way that he can completely relax. Our daughter, Elsa, matured rapidly and became a cheerful and intelligent child. She even became the student council president in middle school, gathering respect and kindness from others. She was nice to everyone and was my greatest pride. Such a life of four of us passed in the blink of an eye amidst countless hardships and joys. Before I knew it, my daughter, Elsa, was 23 years old. After graduating from college, Elsa got a job at the provincial office in the neighboring province and started living by herself. It felt as if the house became somewhat darker without my daughter. Though the actual lighting hadn't changed, I received the impression that it had dimmed somehow. Not only me, but my husband and mother-in-law would have felt the same way. Elsa seemed busy with work, and though she called us frequently, she visited our home only about once a month. Around this time, my mother-in-law stopped doing household chores. "I won't do housework anymore. It's your job since you are the daughter-in-law," she said, and made me do all the housework such as cooking, laundry, and cleaning. When our daughter entered high school, I started a part-time job and I've been working 5 days a week. I could only do household chores before and after work, in other words, early mornings and evenings. Managing all the chores within that time frame was quite challenging. I dedicated all my available time to do the chores. Before my daughter had moved out, both my mother-in-law and daughter helped me, so I didn't have a problem, but once my daughter left and my mother-in-law stopped helping with the chores, my life became a living nightmare. Gradually, things became overwhelming, and I began to receive complaints from my mother-in-law. "This dish isn't flavorful enough. There's a hair on the floor in the living room. How can you say that you cleaned the room? The laundry is piling up. Are you slacking off?" She always found reasons to criticize me. She complained especially about my cooking, and she nitpicked about every dish I made. Whether it was too bland, too salty, or the food were too tough, there were various reasons, but these weren't too bad. At times, she would even say things like, "This is terrible. This is not supposed to be the food for pigs, you know. At least make something edible for human." She went as far as to utter such hurtful words. It would have been nice if my husband had defended me, but he merely ate in silence. And then there was an incident like this. I was going to put on my favorite necklace and I looked everywhere in the room, but I couldn't find the necklace I was looking for. I was disappointed, thinking I might have lost it when I was outside. However, I caught my mother-in-law wearing it a few days later. I was taken aback by this unexpected sight, but I immediately confronted her. "Isn't the necklace mine? Why do you have it?" Without a hint of remorse, my mother-in-law responded, "Oh, this one. Since you can't even tidy up properly, I was organizing the room for you. I was actually thinking of throwing it away, but I kept it for myself because it will be a waste. You don't have a problem, do you?" Stunned by my mother-in-law's unreasonable explanation, I was rendered speechless. Afterward, I kept asking her to return it, but she never gave me back. With days like this, my dissatisfaction continued to grow. On the weekends, when my husband and mother-in-law weren't at home, I frequently went to visit Elsa. It was a time to hear about my daughter's recent news and worries, and it warmed my heart, but at the same time, it was also a place for me to vent my frustrations. Since Elsa had just started working, she must be having a hard time at work, and I couldn't burden her with worries, so I only complained about my dissatisfaction at home lightly. Elsa is a smart child, so she understood everything even though I didn't go into detail. You shouldn't let it bother you too much. Mom, you're doing your best. It might be tough now, but eventually things will definitely turn into a positive direction. Subtly, she continued to offer advice and words of encouragement. I made more effort after I was encouraged by Elsa, and even though I struggled, it was worth it. After a few months, I was able to manage household chores while continuing to work. Thanks to that, the frequency of my mother-in-law's complaints gradually decreased. Even if she wanted to complain about something, there was nothing to nitpick by then. I hoped that this peaceful life would continue, but it didn't. About half a year after Elsa left home, I began to feel a sense of oddness. My mother-in-law stopped replying even when I talked to her. At first, I wondered if it was all in my mind, but it was clear that it wasn't. My mother-in-law had overtly started ignoring me. I wasn't sure if my husband was siding with her or if he was being ordered by her, but when I asked my husband, "This beef stew is delicious, isn't it?" his response was merely a vacant look. This trend continued, and gradually my husband also began to ignore me, much like my mother-in-law. Even when the three of us sat around the table, conversation only flowed between my husband and mother-in-law. By this point, I had become like air in the house. Even when I spoke, attempting to join the conversation, my mother-in-law completely ignored me, and my husband at best gave an indifferent, "Yeah." It didn't stop there. My mother-in-law started harassing me in a new way. One day, out of nowhere, she knocked over a trash can filled with garbage right in front of me, scattering trash everywhere. Even then, my mother-in-law didn't utter a word. Though she didn't say anything, it was evidence from her attitude that she wanted me to clean up the mess. I reluctantly cleaned up the mess she created. Without a word of gratitude, she muttered, and walked away. On another occasion, there were times when plastic bottles were found in the garbage even though I had sorted the garbage, and there were times when she would suddenly buy prepared foods from the supermarket and not touch the food I cooked for her. My husband, influenced by my mother-in-law, engaged in similar behavior of harassment towards me. Day by day, the repeated harassment wore me down and stressed me out, but by the time 6 months had passed, I had stopped caring. Treated like air by my mother-in-law and husband, subjected to frequent harassment day after day, my emotions became numb. I was no longer emotionally affected in my home. What am I living with these people for? Such feelings have crossed my mind not just once or twice. However, I lack the courage to take the step toward divorce. I'm almost 50 years old. The mere thought of becoming a divorcee at this age scared me. The only time I found solace was when I was with Elsa. Talking with Elsa about trivial matters and going out together became my only source of joy. Elsa must have sensed my suffering, but she never probed. In fact, it was my salvation. When I thought of my daughter's kindness, I managed to stay positive, thinking that I had to find my own way out of it. A few months after my mother-in-law and husband began ignoring me, there was a night when I couldn't fall asleep even after midnight. Part of it might have been due to pondering my future. On top of that, heavy rain had been falling since morning that day, creating a deafening roar which could be described as thunderous as the rain hit the ground and the windows. The anguish and the sound of the rain wouldn't let me sleep for a while. I decided to drink some water, so I got out of bed and left my room. The moment I went downstairs and stepped out into the hallway on the main floor, a cold sensation spread to my bare feet with a splashing sound. For a moment, I was confused, but I immediately realized it was due to flooding from the heavy rain. The evening news had reported that a large area, including this house, was threatened with flooding. To assess the situation, I went through each room on the main floor, and every room had been flooded up to my ankles. The sound of rain outside only grew stronger, and it was only a matter of time before the water level reached dangerous heights. I quickly decided that I should evacuate. I considered waking up my husband and mother-in-law, but I stopped myself at the last minute. After all, they would just ignore me. Thinking that way, I decided to leave the house alone. When I went outside, a few firefighters were directing evacuees. The road was filled with people seeking refuge, and it was so noisy that it was hard to believe that it was the middle of the night. Following the instructions of the firefighters, I ended up evacuating to a nearby elementary school. Before leaving the house, I changed clothes and brought valuable items like my wallet and phone. After informing Elsa about the situation to avoid causing her worry, I let the firefighters know that my husband and mother-in-law were still at home. Many people had taken refuge at the elementary school, and you could sense everybody's anxiety from the atmosphere. Amidst this, though it may be inappropriate, I was feeling quite refreshed. Leaving my husband and mother-in-law behind gave me an indescribable sense of pleasure. At the elementary school, I spent the night sleeping on the floor with many others. The rain had stopped by the next day, and the evacuation advisory was lifted in the evening. When I returned home, the water had receded, but it seemed that the flooding had caused significant damage. The floors were soaked, and you could hardly walk without shoes. Most of the appliances seemed to have broken down. When I walked into the house, which was in such a state of disarray, my husband and mother-in-law were working feverishly to restore the situation. My husband noticed that I had returned, and his first words were accusatory. "Where have you been until now? Why didn't you let us know about the flooding?" My husband and mother-in-law, who continued to sleep soundly as the floodwaters continued to rise, were apparently rescued by firefighters a few hours after I left the house. When they woke up, the situation was already so dire that it was difficult to evacuate on their own. They were rescued by boat after a long and terrifying time. Because we evacuated to different shelters, we hadn't seen each other until then. With anger in his voice, my husband said to me, "I don't even want to see the face of someone who abandons her family. I want a divorce." The first thing he said to me after not having a conversation for a long time was a divorce. Without much surprise, I replied to my husband and mother-in-law, "I wanted to let you know, but you would have just ignored me, right? You've been ignoring me no matter what I say. It's you who kept ignoring me all along. If anything, you should be grateful that I told the rescuers." Following my husband, now my mother-in-law snapped. "Who do you think you are talking to us like that? Because of you, we went through so much trouble. I can't believe that you are such a terrible daughter-in-law like this. I've hated you from the moment I met you. I'll never forgive you for returning kindness with enmity." She can't be in her right mind if she's calling it kindness after ignoring me and harassing me so much. She doesn't seem to understand that all of this is a result of her own actions. I want her to put herself in my shoes and imagine living with two other people who keep ignoring her. It seems she lacks the imagination to be able to consider others. "Did you really hate me that much, Kate? But don't worry, I'll grant your wish and I'll divorce him," I said to my mother-in-law firmly. It looked like my husband and mother-in-law were going to continue their insults towards me, but our conversation was interrupted by the sound of the living room door opening. Standing there was Elsa, who had left the house 6 months ago. She must have rushed here after receiving my call last night. My husband and mother-in-law seemed surprised by her unexpected visit. "Elsa, it's been a while. Did you come because you were worried? Grandma is so happy." My mother-in-law spoke in a sugary voice completely different from earlier. Seeing our daughter for the first time in a long time made my husband and mother-in-law smile, but Elsa's expression remained serious. "You both don't have the right to blame Mom, do you?" There was a hint of anger in Elsa's words, making my husband and mother-in-law flinch. "You've been ignoring Mom ever since I left, right?" Elsa's question made my husband and mother-in-law uneasy. "What are you talking about? We didn't ignore her. I don't know what you heard from your mom, but we've been living normally. As I've gotten older, my hearing is getting bad, and there are times I can't hear. Maybe she misunderstood and thought we were ignoring her?" My mother-in-law tried to justify herself, but Elsa saw through it all. "You don't have to pretend because I know everything. You didn't only ignore her, but you also harassed her in other ways." Taking a breath, Elsa turned her attention to my husband. "And Dad, you've been cheating, haven't you?" At Elsa's words, my husband flinched and recoiled. "What are you talking about? What made you think that I'm cheating? Don't say something groundless." Surprised by the word cheating coming from Elsa, my husband stumbled over his words. I got permission from Mom and had a detective investigate. I have evidence, so it's useless to make excuses. Grandma liked that woman too, and she tried to drive Mom away, right? I'd already consulted a lawyer I know, so please talk to the lawyer if you have anything to say from now on. When I looked at my husband and mother-in-law, they looked pale. I only had respect for Elsa for her thorough preparation. They were still trying to make excuses, but Elsa ignored them and turned to me. Mom, you don't have to endure anymore. Live your own life from now on. If you want, why don't you come live with me? I'd be more than happy to live with you. I could only thank Elsa for her offer. Thank you, Elsa. I'll do as you said. I have no attachments to this house, and thanks to you, I feel much better. Though my anxious husband and mother-in-law tried to justify themselves, I turned my back on them just as they had done to me. At the very end, I was able to get back at them. Leaving my stunned husband and mother-in-law behind, I walked away from the scene with Elsa. A few weeks later, the divorce with my husband was finalized. Since I received alimony from my husband, I used that money to move to a new place. I moved to a neighboring province and started living with Elsa. As for my husband and mother-in-law, it seems the flood damage was worse than expected, and the repairs alone cost tens of thousands of dollars. Because he also had to pay alimony, my husband's savings were depleted, and now his elderly mother is working to make ends meet. My husband seems to have been dumped by his affair partner, who is more than 10 years younger than him. Perhaps his affair partner grew tired of my husband, who lost most of his assets. I learned these pieces of information later through Elsa. After the divorce, I was no longer involved with my husband or mother-in-law, but I still had to deal with the aftermath of everything. Elsa was the one who helped me through those times. Thanks to my dependable daughter, I was able to start a new life. Now I am living a happy and fulfilling life, and I almost forget that I used to be afraid of being a divorcee. I've heard someone say that 90% of the things that you get anxious about never happen. Humans tend to unnecessarily harbor many anxieties about the future. Though this is a function developed to avoid danger in the course of survival, in reality, the dangers we imagine don't happen all that often. I worried that my divorce would lead to loneliness and financial hardship, but those fears never materialized. I started living with Elsa again and made new friends in the new neighborhood. I also found a new job that suits me, and I feel dozens of times happier every day than I did before. Even my new friend, who is a housewife that I made recently, envies me for getting divorced. I'll enjoy the precious time I get to live with my daughter again as much as I can. With that in mind, I take a new step forward again today.